Welcome and thank you for beginning to watch this documentary. Whatever happens, I hope this documentary, which will be in a series of episodes, will be quite informative to you. Now, I'm going to put some timestamps of chapters, but if you wish to know how I came to creating this documentary, then you can stay and I'll explain to you how I ended up on this journey. And this journey really starts at around the age of 17. It's more primarily to do with my mother telling me to go to a local library, which at the time, this local library was probably one of the best things I had ever seen, because I was always a person that wanted to go to the library and take out books. But I've always had a strong interest in Africa and the Caribbean, primarily the Caribbean being the major focus. And I'd never forget walking into this library and just being totally overwhelmed by the amount of books that were in front of me. It was ridiculous. It was like nothing I've ever seen before, apart from going into New Beacon books. And I didn't know what to pick. So the paternal side of my family's from Grenada, so I picked a book on Grenada by Beverly Still, the late historian. And I remember reading this book and thinking, oh, there's stuff that I know, and there's stuff that I've never come across before. And one of the things that surprised me, you have to remember I was a teenager here, is that Grenadians spoke French Creole. Now, I'd never associated Creole, French Creole, however you defined it or define it, with Grenadians. I've always associated that with Martiniquans, Guadeloupeans, because I supported Arsenal and Thierry Henry is a Creole speaker. I associated it with primarily Sainte-Lucians and Dominicans and Hackney, because that's the place, Wrigley Road, you would actually hear people speaking Creole. And I was like, that's interesting. So I read the book from cover to cover quite quickly. And the first thing I did at the time, my grandfather was still alive. And I was like, did Grenadians speak French Creole? And to my surprise, my grandfather could speak it actually quite fluently. And that really set off a snowball effect of me coming really, really interested in Creole languages, reading books about primarily Caribbean Creole languages, whether they be Papia Bento, Antiguan Creole, Montserrat Creole, St. Vincent Creole, Bajan, Jamaican, whatever it may be. And I ended up buying loads of books. But where this changes is when I get a DSLR camera. I decided not to go to the Caribbean for a few years. And then when I decided to start going again, I bought a DSLR because I saw amazing pictures people could take. And I went on holiday, took those pictures, came back. The camera was sitting catching dust. So I thought, what am I going to do with this camera? And then I thought to myself, what actually happened is that at the time I could pick up a channel called France O on my satellite system, France Overseas. It no longer exists. But what I liked about it is that you could see the French Caribbean culture, you could see the French Guyanese news, you could see the Martinique news, the Guadeloupe news, La Réunion, which is in the Indian Ocean. You could see all these news broadcasts in the morning, and you would see things that are very similar to the English-speaking Caribbean, of course, because the Caribbeans were one, regardless of our colonial parameters and how we define the Caribbean, French Caribbean, Dutch Caribbean, etc. And I saw the culture and I was like, everything looked similar, and they were speaking Creole. And they would report on stuff that was going on in the French Caribbean community in France. And then a show, it was like a hair show, came up on the screen called the Natural Hair Academy. And I said, it looks interesting. 3,000 black women in one room, doing hair, all kinds of stuff. I thought, yeah, I would like to go there one day. I left it for 1 year because I went back to the Caribbean, and then I left it for another year. I'm talking holidays here. And then eventually it came to me, maybe I should do a documentary about Creole. It just randomly came to me. Like, it wasn't, I was thinking, I'm not equipped to really do that, but why not? Like, why not do it? Like, I don't see there's anything stopping me from doing it. The joke is, still to this day, I'm a monolingual speaker. I only speak English. So I decided to do my first set of interviews at the Natural Hair Academy, which is in France. Obviously, you know, I thought it would be a lot easier doing it there, because how do I know what is a Saint Lucian and a Dominican in the UK unless I'm at a Saint Lucian or Dominican event? Going there, you're going to meet lots of Guadeloupeans, a lot of Martinican people, a lot of French Guyanese people. So I thought it was the easiest route, but I don't speak French. So what I decided to do is to write a set of questions, put it in Google Translate, and send it to my friend who actually lives in France, Samantha. And she looked at it and she said the questions were fine. So I went, and I'll never forget going on the Eurostar and thinking, this is weird. When I get to France, people are going to think I'm an idiot. Like, I don't even speak their language and I'm asking them about Creole. And then I got to France. I'll never forget leaving the hotel. I'm walking to the show or the event, and I'm thinking people are going to think I'm an idiot. Like, and when I got there, it was the total opposite. People were so interested. They thought I was working for a TV company. They thought this was going to be some big cinema documentary. Nothing like that, of course, because most of it I filmed on my DSLR and my camera phone. And I don't really still know how to use a camera properly, to be honest with you. But so many people were interested, and that was really motivating. That really warmed my heart. And I thought, do you know what? This is something to continue with. And here we are now. I left it for a few years because, you know, life gets in the way, and then we had that big global event, which we all know where it was. And I thought I was going to leave it, but I thought, no, I really have to. It really was sitting on my spirit, and I really have to finish it. So here we are, and I hope that whatever you see from this, you gain something, you learn something, and maybe it might allow you to understand why your parents or your grandparents are a particular way, or maybe it might help you to actually learn the language and actually use it for its benefit. Things that I want to make clear. This word Creole, it's such a broad word. It can be applied to food, plants, animals, multiple things. So obviously I'm talking about language, but I think it's important to emphasize what languages I'm talking about, what Creole languages. So I'm talking about Saint Lucian, Dominican, Martinican, Guadeloupean, French Guyanese, Haitian, and Grenadian and Trinidadian. Just so we're clear, because, you know, some people might conflate it with Seychelles Creole, La Réunion Creole, and I just wanted to make that clear. The other thing is that I'm taking views from the Caribbean, people living in the Caribbean, and I'm taking views for the diaspora. So that means people who were raised in the Caribbean or of Caribbean descent. So I make that quite clear who's talking, and you will see that on the screen, or see that in the way they speak or the way I've edited it, what angle that they're actually coming from. Also, that just remembering that I'm not a speaker of Creole. However, people research history, culture all the time, even though they weren't at that place or time, or actually don't speak the language. And I definitely know I've interviewed the right professors, the right people that have that lived experience. And the last thing, I just hope that you enjoy it. And I think you will enjoy it. I think you will definitely gain something from it. And I think you'll understand a bit more about maybe the way your community were to the language, or maybe the way your parents or grandparents were towards the language. And it might invoke something in you to do something about your relationship with the language, whether it's already strong and you wish to pass it on to somebody else, or whether you don't know the language at all and wish to learn it. And there's all types of views, all types of advice, all types of things that people can definitely gain from this. So I know you will enjoy it, and oh boy, there's nothing more left to say. Enjoy.
C'est-à-dire que Guadeloupe, Martinique, même Dominique a été aussi sous l'occupation française. Et c'est pourquoi que le créole, parce que le créole a été créé à partir de la langue française. 80% des mots créoles viennent du français.
Creole is, as you know, a contact language. So Creole was born out of contact between enslaved Africans and French colonizers. Enslaved people came to Grenada between, I would say, from the 1600s to the early 1800s. When these enslaved Africans arrived in Grenada, they came from various parts of Africa, so they would have had no common or unifying language to communicate with each other. So essentially and cleverly, they crafted this Creole language by borrowing the words or the lexicon from the French language, the vocabulary, and the grammar from, I would say, largely West African languages. So when I say the words or the vocabulary, I would give you an example. We would say in Grenada, and we still do, we would say a grap of coconuts. Well, the word grap comes directly from French, and it means a bunch or a cluster. We would describe someone as being a soula. That word again comes from the French soulard, meaning a drunk. That's exactly how we use it. So the words are derived from French, creolized, but derived from French. The grammar is largely, I think, the influence of the grammar is African. If you do a comparison of French, and I don't really like to do comparisons of French and Creole, but if you compare the grammar, for example, the verb in French, for example, you take a verb like parler in French, which means to speak. In French, you would say je parle. The present tense, I am speaking. In Creole, you would say moi ka parler. I am speaking. The ka is what is called a tense marker. That is what is used to denote the present tense. So you say moi ka parler, I'm speaking. You would use this marker to denote, whereas in French, that is not done. So that is the difference. So it came about from contact between, as I said, the enslaved and the French. That's basically the origin.
We have Dr. Merle Collins of University of Maryland, USA, who has put forward a theory which mirrors what linguists tell us causes the formation of a Creole. And the way I understand it is that you had West Africans brought here over a period of 3-4 centuries. And a paper recently done by Miss George out of SOAS, University of London, SOAS. She has now been able to establish with her research of the documents, the ancient documents, that there were West Africans speaking something like more than 100 languages. I think the figure she gave was 150, 151 languages in the Caribbean. And many of them would be here in Grenada, so that they really didn't understand each other. It seems that the West African languages have some similarity in syntax, or a lot of them do, because you have different groups of West African languages. They use the syntax and the French vocabulary, to which later was added Kalinago words. I shouldn't even say later, to which is added Kalinago words. The Kalinago are the people who had been called the Caribs by European colonizers.
Nobody invested in us learning Kwéyòl. The French and others did not teach us anything. From their point of view, the more ignorant we were, the better for them, the longer they could continue slavery. So not one penny was spent by the Europeans in helping elevate our minds. It was ourselves who evolved Creole using the words available and the grammar from Africa to be where we are today.
the way we speak is so similar, bro. But they just switch it
Haitians
with
are one
colonial
Haitian,
language.
most definitely. Because I know a girl that's Haitian, and for years growing up with her, I thought she was Lucian. For years.
It's just the way we say
Only
things.
when her mum said to me, "No, we're from Haiti," I was like, "What?"
Yeah, bro. It's just
Are you sure? Like, are you sure? Because I know Lucians, bro. You lot are Lucians. Are you sure?
Yeah. Like in Guadeloupe, we speak pretty much the same language, bro. But it's not the same. There's a lot more adjectives, a lot more extra stuff in there, a lot more phonetics in there that tends to be a bit more French per se.
Yeah.
Like Haitians speak like an older kind of French, and Lucia, we follow the way they say certain things. Like it's really slack and raw. Like we Lucians even more slack and raw than the Haitians are. So
I agree.
Yeah, bro.
Some people are saying Creole across the Caribbean, it's the same language with differences, and some people are saying it's different languages in the Caribbean, the Creoles of the Caribbean. What do you personally think? Do you think it's the same language but they have differences, or do you think they're totally different?
No, it's the same language with differences.
Même monde, même poil. Same people, same kind of hairs. Okay? There are only varieties in it. A classical difference is between the Creoles, moins Vini from St. Lucia, and the Creoles, moins Vini. Okay? So in Henderson's book, they would be writing K, where we would say Ka, right? Classically in Mandinka, in terms of the central Mandinka Empire, they use Ka, right? In terms of the coastal Mandinka, they use K. So basically, the differences between the two of us is that we St. Lucians are probably further into the center, and the Dominicans were taken more along the coast.
Kwéyòl en Dominique, Haïti, non, Dominique, Sainte-Lucie, Martinique, Guadeloupe. Pour moi, c'est même bitin. Et puis, Guadeloupe, c'est une petite différence parce que je vais dire tête aïe, et puis nous allons dire tête li. C'est pas gogo, mais structure là, c'est même bail. Nous ka aller, nous te ka aller, nous ke ka aller, nous te, c'est même bitin là. Et puis, mais Haïti, et puis Guyane, c'est différent parce qu'en Haïti, nous ka dit m'a parlé, et puis nous ka dit
pas parler, non parler.
Mon ka aller, ou moins ka aller, et puis nous ka couper parole yo, parce que nous ka dit papa, nous ka dit papa moins. Vous comprenez? So,
pour moi, c'est même bail.
Oui, c'est même bail, mais sous met les pieds et puis ou accoutumé pour parler pieds, ou pas de problème, mais pour Guyane, pour moi, on a le problème parce que il y a des différents parce que c'est plus foncé, vous comprenez? C'est plus foncé.
Les manières, il y a parler.
Oui, et puis il y a Portuguese,
South American, like the Brazilian, wow.
Bonjour tout le monde! Aujourd'hui, nous allons apprendre des petits mots créoles Guadeloupe
et en Creole Sainte-Lucie.
Exode pas, ouais!
Comment tu vas?
En créole Guadeloupe, nous avons l'eau manière dit ça. Qui genre? Ou bien?
Et pour Creole Sainte-Lucie, on dit ça qu'a fait.
Ou bien? Où vas-tu?
En Creole Sainte-Lucie, on dit côté au calé.
Et en créole Guadeloupe, nous avons dit au locaille.
Laisse-moi tranquille.
En créole Guadeloupe, on dit foutez-moi la paix, ouais.
En Creole Sainte-Lucie, on dit quittez mes battes mise moi.
Je vais travailler.
Moi qu'elle travaille.
En qu'elle travaille.
I personally understand all because you have the Haitian, you have the Martinique, you have Guadeloupe. St. Lucia speaks differently. St. Lucia and Dominica are a little alike because they mix it a little bit English. And of course, French Guyana is something completely different. So unless you really know it or you live there, you will not understand it. So, you want an example of it?
Yes, please.
For example, in the Caribbean, they would say, bonjour, ça fait, comment vous êtes? Ça qu'a fait. In French Guyana, we say, bonjour, comment tu fika? And the time mo fika bien, mo la, mo kajubate. To say I want my money, here they'll say moi vle l'argent moi. In French Guyana we say mole musumake. So it's completely different. The Caribbean they say moi, which is me, to for you, Li, in French Guyana we say to, which is you, mo, which is more, me. Puli is the same word, so to speak.
And I used to preach in Haiti. Before the earthquake, I went there twice. And then the people can understand me very well when I speak when I preach from the Creole New Testament, Sainte-Lucie Creole New Testament. So the difference I find is in the orthography, not really the pronunciation as such, because they could understand. I was speaking without an interpreter, and they understood very well. I preached for a whole week,
When you go to Haiti also, Haiti is more contractions and some slight differences, but when you catch the differences, then you can understand. So it's not different languages, it's the same.
The structure of Haitian Creole is dominantly mirrored on the Dahomian Ewe Fon speakers, because that's what Haiti mainly comprised, the people from Dahomey. However, in the St. Lucian case, quite a number of the early slaves were field slaves in St. Lucia, and they were from Dahomey. The other group in the early St. Lucian mix from Africa would be Wolofs and Mandinkas. So you've got all of these different languages of origins being merged under different kinds of influences at different periods of time. So for me, it doesn't take me long to learn the Martinican varieties or the Dominican varieties, etc.
J'aime danser.
Aïe, moi aimé danser.
Moi aimé danser.
Tu ne te lasses pas de parler.
Ou pas lasse parler.
Et vous, ou pas lasse parler?
Ferme ta gueule.
Fermez là.
Fermez jolou.
Tu es une belle femme.
Ouais, c'est une belle petite madame, hein?
Ah, vous sont belles femmes même.
Aujourd'hui, nous allons beaucoup parler.
Jodia, nous parlons pile même.
Jodia, nous parler en chai.
Regarde le monsieur.
Il n'a pas de cheveux.
Regarde monsieur là.
Regarde monsieur là.
Tête coco sec.
Qui panichivé.
Part of the lexicon, in some cases, I'm going to give an example. Cob is used in Haiti. It means money. I remember the first time I heard cob. So I said, well, what this cob is about? And I asked a Haitian friend. He said, well, it means money. And so I said, well, we say l'argent. And they say, well, we say l'argent as well. But they use the word cob. And another word, sometimes if you're not aware of those differences, you'd be starting to say, well, what? I don't understand what he or she is saying. When a Haitian tell you shita, shita means sit down. Well, now Martinique say assise. Guadeloupe say sise. So you have variations like that. So although we may understand each other, but there are cases also where each Creole has its own little lexical differences and so forth. So
I remember when I was a teenager, maybe 16, 17, like that. Some people from Trinidad, Trinidad, I think it was Trinidad. I can't remember the situation, but there was this person from Trinidad. She was coming over to France, visiting France probably, and she didn't speak a word of French. My mom didn't speak a word of English, and they started to speak Creole. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. And they were definitely able to understand each other, even though some words were different, and it was quite fluent. And I thought it was very, very nice.
Are you a Creole Patois speaker or not?
I understand a bit of it, and I understand the intent of it. I think, like most people, my parents used it to swear at me, or to try to pick things up when they spoke to people. But what I've realised as I've got older is that Patois, or Creole, call it whatever you will, was a language of the poor, or that's how they saw it. So obviously, you know, people understand these islands were colonised a lot. Well, Dominica anyway, where my parents come from. So once you got a bit more intelligent, articulate, educated, or felt better, bourgeois, you didn't want to be speaking Patois, because Patois was a language of the poor.
What's the language of Dominica, St. Lucia called?
Creole, the language.
Yeah, Creole.
Creole.
Creole. Yeah. But I don't know, like
the official language in English. On the road and you know, in people's homes, majorities is Creole.
Creole. There was a time when they were saying Patois.
Yeah, but
are you saying Patois in Creole?
That's like a
Creole.
That's like a it's got a whole like a negative history behind it.
Yeah,
So
you know that.
Yeah, they change that and you know they adopt the Creole.
Make it as Creole. Yeah. That's what we use.
Well, I know it as Creole.
Okay, when I grew up, I knew it as Patois, but I think more and more now, the use of Creole is used a lot more.
Yeah.
So they have the Jeunet Creole and all of that stuff. So, yeah, I think formally it's known as Creole, but when you speak to people at home, they'll say, "Hey, you're speaking Patois. What are you speaking Patois for?" So, yeah.
Yeah.
Dominantly, all of us in St. Lucia in my time called it Patois. Okay. However, when I studied the Creole languages further, I began to understand that there was a category for languages of mixed inheritance, such as ours, and these were in the category called Creole languages. Although I still felt, and probably still do, that, hey, I called it Patois, not because I wanted to say that it was a dialect of French, because that's what the word actually means in French. We did not use it in relation to French people. It was just what we named our language. It was part of the classifications that we had, not only for language, but for people.
What's the language of St. Lucia called? English and Creole. Creole, of course, known also as Kwéyòl. Among people, when you speak to people, it's Kwéyòl.
As I studied more, encountered the external classification, and their view was, hey, calling the languages by the term Patois is to demean them, okay? So basically I then went along with the idea, well, okay, let's call it Creole, yeah? But innately, that makes no sense to me. I'm only doing it in order to help the prestige of our languages as far as possible. But if I'm talking to somebody of my age group within my own environment, that goes out of the window.
Some people refer to it as Patois. I never do that. I never do that. For the simple reason that, well, I'll tell you what. Barack Obama was president of the United States of America, and I heard, well, people spoke of him as the black president or the African American president, but nobody ever referred to him as the nigger president. So when I speak of the language, I never refer to it as Patois. I think it's derogatory, if you ask me. It, in a sense, signifies a language that, or you're struggling, you know, speak a language that you can't speak. I've always regarded the Patois as the lowest form of a language. So if you have been trying to speak English and you can't speak it too well and you're struggling through it and you have just a basic understanding, a basic conceptualization of it, then to me it's a Patois. But when you have a language that is quite complete in itself, I always find that to refer to it as a Patois is nothing but derogatory. So I never refer to it as Patois, I always refer to it as Creole.
But in classification terms, Creole means languages of mixed heritage. Before that, it comes from the Portuguese word crioulo. The crioulo were people of mixed, often Mandinka and Portuguese heritage, and they were basically mixtures of the people who sold the slaves, the Portuguese, and the people who imported the slaves within Africa. So it was mainly the Mandinka mothers who would be getting first the gum Arabic and then the actual slaves from the center in Mali, and the Portuguese who'd be selling them from some of the Senegambian forts. So the actual word Creole, if you move it back, is more of a kind of genetic classification, but it's been taken by linguists, I guess such as myself, because I'd entered the club, to mean a language of mixed origin. So
Patois is not a negative thing for Trinidadians and Tobagonians, or even Grenadians. Patois has become very negative in Martinique and Guadeloupe, French Guyana and Haiti, obviously because they were French colonies, and they're still linked to France in terms of language and education, all the way up to university. So Patois, we know that Patois is a negative thing in France and in French, but it lost its negativity in Trinidad a long time ago. So when you cannot come to this country and say, hello, do you speak French Creole? Or worse, hello, do you speak Creole French or French lexicon Creole? Can you help me understand your French lexified Creole? People look at you like, what are you talking about? Creole is not a language. I mean, the younger generation now is learning about Creole as the name of a language, thanks to CXC, right? But that's specifically English Creoles. But the average person who speaks Patois or is descended from a Patois speaking family, they say it with pride. Yes, there are still people who see it as something negative, but not because of the name, but because of the language itself and its connections to history. So Patois has no negative connotations for us anymore, at least in this day and age.
Let me come to the word Patois and the reason why I myself shy away from using that word. The older people in Grenada still do. They will tell you about Patois and they speak Patois. And I respect that, and I respect their choice or their use of that word. But as I did the research, I started writing this book and using the word Patois. But I went back to the French Petit Robert dictionary, which is considered the Bible, for if you're looking up the meaning of French words. It's monolingual, it's all in French. And I looked at the definition of Patois, and it said, and I'm translating loosely from French, it said that it is a language that is considered incorrect or incomprehensible. So that really gave me pause and led me to really go back and use the word Creole, or as I say, qu'elle, because what I discovered in the research that I did is that the speakers, and I defer to them because it is their language, the speakers themselves kept using the word. I kept hearing qu'elle, not Kwéyòl as you would in Sainte-Lucie. I kept hearing qu'elle. So I followed them and followed their lead and used the word qu'elle.
Right now, I think what brings a lot of us together in understanding Creole languages and the importance of them is we recognize that we all share some sort of history with them being labeled as Creole languages. Now, in terms of whether or not they should still be called Creole languages or we should call them, by the nationality of the country, because we say Italian, we say English, we say Spanish, those are also associated to nationality of the people. I think we can get to that point to do that. So even right now, depending on who I'm speaking to, if they prefer that I say Haitian Creole, I will. If they prefer I say Haitian, I will. And eventually maybe we'll get to that point where it won't seem that silly when someone says, speak Jamaican to me or speak Haitian to me or whatever, because it is actually the language of the country. So yeah, I believe we'll get to that point. Right now, I am just focused on making sure there's education around bringing awareness to the languages, and then hopefully we can get to that point of now let's get to how to properly represent these languages.
So when we're talking about the Creole language in Dominica, which is the language of the folk and the language of the people, rather than the language of kind of hierarchy, which is more associated with English, or the Queen's English as it might be termed, we see a kind of a socio-spatial dynamic kind of playing out. So where more English would be spoken in town, in Rosa, which is associated with institutions like the Anglican Church, like the courts, like government, and then we see more in various different enclaves around the island where Creole is spoken with a greater intensity and more amongst the populations in those areas. So areas like Grand Bay would be very well known for Creole. Areas like Soufrière in the southwest of the island would be really well known for Creole. And if we go back kind of throughout the history of the Caribbean, we see that in various different ways, Creoles or Patois were being positioned in relation to the dominant language of English or French, if you will. Now in Dominica, it's quite interesting because the island shifted back and forward throughout a kind of over 100-year history between the English and the French, as the French were vying for dominance of all of the kind of the string of islands from Sainte-Lucie up to Martinique, Guadeloupe, Dominica as well. The English attempted to get hold of various of those islands to try and disrupt the hegemony throughout the region, or their dominance throughout the region. And so it meant that when the English took control of Dominica and took control of the statecraft, what they weren't able to control was the small number of French yeomen or kind of peasant settlers who had a small number of enslaved people in various different areas around the island. And people like Lennox Honeychurch have written about this extensively. Michel Rolfe Trouillot as well, a Haitian anthropologist, has written about this in Dominica as well. You've got these kind of small language enclaves. With the kind of the mountainousness of the island, there wouldn't be a great amount of traffic between these different more remote and isolated villages. So within those enclaves, outside of Rosa, in the kind of in the hinterlands, but also on the kind of the further coasts, you'd have Creole being spoken more predominantly. Whereas amongst the bourgeoisie in town, you'd have more so English as the kind of dominant language.
Did you ever experience educated people pretending that they couldn't speak the language?
Oh yes, very much so, especially if they lived in town, in Rosa, the capital. They pretended they didn't understand it. That was nonsense. Everyone was immersed in the language, but they wouldn't speak it and pretend they didn't understand, because they were a cut above the rest. So we would say, they're too fresh, man. Comparaison.
Now in the 1980s and around that time, pioneered by kind of Creole linguists on the island, there was a sense that the middle classes and their children had lost the Creole language. So they didn't have an autonomous language which could be associated with Dominica, but they spoke instead English as their main language. And so whilst before, folks from the countryside had been aiming, those who were more kind of, who spoke Creole as a first language, had aimed to give their children opportunities, had aimed not to speak so much Creole with them, but more to speak English to their children in order for them to advance themselves through education. There was the opposite going on in town, where the middle classes were saying, well, we want our children to be able to speak Creole. How could you govern the island? How could you become Prime Minister of the island, for example, if you weren't conversant in the language of the masses? So on the one hand, some of the middle classes were turning towards Creole and a need to learn it and sustain a kind of a cultural vitality of the place through this language, through this independent language, a nation tongue or nation language, if you will, to use Kamal Brathwaite's term, on the one hand. And then you had folks from the rural communities who were still very much interested in giving children a grasp of kind of the Queen's English to be able to advance educationally. So you have these real kind of contradictions going on within what Trouillot has called a kind of a conflicting language situation.
it's not everywhere, or I might be wrong, but you correct me. It's not everywhere in Saint Lucia that particularly speaks Creole, isn't it? It's particular parts.
No, at one stage you could say 99.9% everywhere speaks Creole. The places where you had more English spoken or greater aspirations was Castries, the capital. Yeah. What has happened now may be the influence of the capital has spread throughout. But that's it really. But definitely there was the Castries divide versus the rest of the island. But if you trace that in history, many of the mulattoes who actually owned slaves in St. Lucia lived in Castries. Yeah? And so really we, or the part I came from, was more the plantation part. Yeah? And the Castries part was what they call the free coloreds. And some of them, I think 6, yeah, they owned at least, well, I'd have to go back to the book, but they may well have owned 6 or more of all of the plantations in St. Lucia.
So certainly my French Creole will be a little different from somebody who come from, you know, in the countryside, Periola and so forth. And it's amazing to hear even in the intonation, and I'm saying to myself, I don't have it quite right yet, you know. So you have the right. Everybody speak Creole. You have people also who do not want to speak Creole because they're associated with other things. But the intonation, the accent, the use of the words will be different.
You know, countless times about understanding but not being confident enough to speak the language, and I think that is actually key. You know, as Caribbeans, it may be, you know, a platform that you may not understand or a dimension you don't quite get, but as Africans, it's quite it's a sore point, you know, because you know, Southeast Asians are able to do it. You know, my next door neighbour Shabana, she could have a full conversation with her mum by the age of 5 in Urdu. Do you know what I mean? But you know, why wasn't that happening in African households?
Yeah, I feel like it's I don't feel like it's entirely different with my family, but I feel like my parents in particular, contrasting the difference to yours, they made sure I went to Dominica regularly, like a good average of about 6 to 7 times. I mean, the thing that I share with you is the idea that the patois that we speak, which is broken French, if we were to granularly dissect it and describe what it is, wasn't really taught as such to me when I was young.
It's bad spelling.
Yeah. And I think that's also one of the reasons why Kwéyòl doesn't enjoy the same esteem as other languages. People thinking, oh, it's just a little, you know, you just speak it amongst yourself. It's just a little joke thing kind of thing.
It's just French.
It's, oh, don't start on that one. Isn't it just broken French, that one?
Mm-hmm.
But isn't it just broken French?
Pardon?
Isn't it just broken French?
You believe that?
Well.
You want to answer that? Of course it's not.
No.
Did you used to think that?
I'm not interview, I was just asking.
Oh.
Creole is not a real language. Non me pe jelas o deban tebe. Bref. We don't speak a real language, we speak a broken French. I get it. You're brainwashed. Like, I get it, but it's not okay. It's 2024. Learn to unlearn things that you have been taught growing up that are incorrect. Most of us were not even allowed to speak Creole growing up because parents and grandparents, the elderly, wanted to speak it amongst themselves so that we could not understand their conversation. That happened to a lot of us. For some people, their parents would be like, when they spoke Creole, don't speak that. You know, they would be told that they need to only speak English so that they can master English or French or Spanish or Dutch, you know, basically the colonizers' language. However, like, this isn't the case for everybody. There were people who were allowed to speak Creole, parents who taught their children to speak Creole. A lot of people, actually, Creole is their first language. A lot of us are just repeating what we've been told. Creole is bad. Creole is this, it's vulgar, it's broken French, it's this and that. But a lot of y'all never took the time to actually research, oh, is this true about Creole? Let me see for myself. Which evidently it's not true. There's this man, his name was Henry Breen, and he was the colonial mayor of Castries in St. Lucia at the time. And basically what he said about Creole was that it was simply the Negro language. formed from French jargon. And like it's basically French, but stripped away from its manlyhood to accommodate, children and toothless old women. Okay.
So every time someone says broken French, like it gets me all the time. And funny enough, I think at one point that is how I was like hearing the way to like describe to people what the language was. So I really can't fault people because we're slowly learning. So just public service announcement, y'all, there's no such thing as broken English, broken French, broken whatever, okay? So I think if we more and more just tell people that, they will like get it eventually. And I think for me, let me tell you what made me actually realize that there's nothing broken about Haitian Creole. I actually did a minor in French in university on accident. And I took French because I thought, oh, I know Haitian Creole. I will pass this course easily. Boy, was I wrong. Because just because I knew Haitian Creole didn't mean that I would be able to use a lot of the stuff, especially when it came onto grammar, to help me with French. So the thing I would say that makes French and Haitian Creole similar sometimes is mainly vocabulary. When we're talking about grammar with sentence structure and all of that, two completely different things. And that's why I knew they were two completely different languages. So yeah. So how, I guess my question to some people too is, how would you feel if I said, oh, how you feel speaking broken Latin? Because I mean, English is a mix-up of, other languages too, but we don't call it broken Latin or whatever. So I think the same respect should be given to Creole languages as well.
That's the idea of Creoles as broken languages is really a sociological construct, and that would have come about in the Caribbean because of slavery. There were the European languages that were interacting with the African languages, and when the new languages were being formed, there was no name, but that was the mode of communication. And because they did not match up to what the Europeans considered to be the standard, then they considered anything not European to be broken.
I actually had a long rant about why we use things like bastardized French, broken French, bad French, all these negative words. And nobody calls French crappy Latin. Nobody calls Spanish messed up Latin. Nobody calls Portuguese pathetic Latin. Nobody does. These are the Romance languages, the daughters of Vulgar Latin. And Vulgar Latin, of course, was the Latin of the people, in conjunction with the other languages in their areas. And these languages have gone through so many phases where they became symbols of nationhood. And then as they became nations, colonial expansion, so they took their notions of nationhood and that became conquering. So I don't really feel it important that French Creole and other Creole speakers don't need to be going around conquering anybody and causing wars and hostility just to get where you are. But to call a language a broken language is basically to say, I'm sorry, you incompetent speaker. You don't have the wherewithal, you don't have the intelligence, you don't have the mindset, you don't have the ability. You poor little fool. You just don't have the ability to master this perfect, pure language. And you with your impurities, move on. And there's nobody who has a broken language. There's no brain that's broken. There's no language or community that's broken. I mean, of course, we could talk about spiritual brokenness, and that's a whole other story, because all of us basically need help in one way or the other. But linguistically, every language is complete. Every language is the perfect and most timely vehicle for your thought, your personal thoughts, your thoughts as expressed to others, your thoughts as expressed to God. Every language is complete.
But then again, you can't blame them, because if that's what they've always heard, even some adults, the older generation Dominicans, they would just say, "Oh, it's just a patois. It's not a language."
This is how my grandma talks. Yeah. How my granddad talks. In particular, when he found out I was learning to speak Kwéyòl, he said, "Oh, you'll end up speaking it better than me." Like I said, and I was thinking, well, I don't know how, because I can barely speak it, but okay. And what he was referring to is he said, you'll speak it better than mine because mine's a broken French. He was thinking I was learning French, and therefore I was going to be speaking a better language than him. And that's the danger with people saying that it's the brainwashing. They just think that they're speaking a language which is not proper and it's broken and it's not correct. And it's sad because that you can see he's almost an 80-year-old man, and you can see the shame he's had to internalize. He's been taught for his whole life that it's not a proper language.
In a more general way, I would say that we have to bear in mind that Creole is the language of the enslaved. And the enslaved were looked down upon. And I think a people and their language are viewed through the same lens. So if the people are looked down upon, if the people are disparaged, I think the language is also disparaged. And that certainly was the attitude towards Creole, I would say up until 30, 40 years ago. Creole was associated with poverty, illiteracy, low socioeconomic status. So the language was not held in high regard.
I reread Derek Walcott's speech when he received his Nobel Laureate Prize. Because I'd read it many, many times. I used it in my PhD. And what he said there, he was speaking about our cultures, which would include our language. And he did say they were broken. They were broken pieces from different places. But what came together is as valid, as relevant so in terms of the Creole, as the French, the English, the whatever West African languages it came from. What was recreated with love. What was created out of adversity. And there's nothing about a language that we should think is lesser than, because it's such a creative to have come up with something that everybody else could have spoken, could then communicate with. People coming from so different language backgrounds. I would tell that person that if you recognize the brilliance in that, the genius in that, then you won't be saying that about the Creole language or any language for that matter.
But Creole languages still seem to be, I'm going to use the word, highly oppressed. And I think that oppression is, between Marcus Garvey and his lovely mouthpiece, Bob Marley and others, we have to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. And basically, I could just make this as a little plug for doing linguistics. If everybody did a little bit of historical linguistics, a little bit of sociolinguistics, a little bit of understanding the vocal apparatus, if you even do one course in phonetics and phonology, and you do it from a socio-phonetic point of view, you say, but wait, all of us have a vocal apparatus. Every human being that walks this planet. All of us have a brain. All of us have lungs. All of us have everything, every muscle, every tissue in place to produce language. Why is it that is my vocal apparatus broken? Is my brain broken? How does calling a language a broken language make any sense? Basically, what your attitude towards a language is really your attitude towards the speaker. You are saying that speaker is producing something that my ears don't like to hear, doesn't line up with what I know. I prefer what I know, and therefore I have suddenly become the pronouncer of all things good and all things evil. And I pronounce that language inadequate and barbaric and broken, and I say I'm better. And who are you to tell me, again, that your skin color, your hair, and your way of speech is better than mine? I didn't know you were playing God, right? So as I know, God made me, and he made my vocal apparatus and everything else, and therefore there's nothing about the way I speak that's broken, and there's nothing in the way about that person speaks is broken, or the way that you speak is broken. That's a whole bunch of rubbish.
Like, if we learned your languages, right? We learned your French, we learned your English, we learned your Spanish. We created a whole new freaking language. And you still calling us them when we know more languages than you? You have to ask yourself, if the colonizers said things like this, why wouldn't we? And like, even today, it's not uncommon to hear people say things like this about Creole. Like, y'all giving these people, these colonizers, so much power over us still today in 2024 about our own language. Zot back our PS. Oh my God, just ask yourselves, what was the goal in mind? Why do we hate Creole so much? Not me, but a lot of us still do. A lot of us still think badly about Creole. Why? It's all systematic. The power over us is still it's still there.
Alors nous ici seulement pour des jours et puis parler puis les mots langue créole vraiment c'est un bon bagage pour nous parce que bon nous qu'à parler petit anglais donc parler créole c'est un bon bagage vraiment. Donc toute activité que ce soit pour restaurant, manger en bagaille, parler puis moun, parler puis chauffeur taxi was a good thing.
Yeah, Haiti. So it was just so useful there. It's like I said, I mean, there are differences. Kind of, they'd say we in Sainte-Lucie say qu'elle, they'd say map. At first I thought, what's that about? But it was really, really useful there. In terms of when I had to interview Joycelyn, it was useful there as well, just to kind of do that.
Well, for me, I happened to travel with some Haitians who were coming to get a visa in Barbados, and they could not speak English. Their French was not very strong, and you had to fill out the immigration form. And from the time I think what happened, it was I was talking Creole with my aunt, and think we knew that we were going to travel together, so I started filling out my form and so forth. And they were looking kind of lost, and I helped them. Of course, I told them in Creole what it is and helped them fill out their forms. So to me, I felt good to have been able to use also our common, language to help each other, because I could be in a situation, difficult situation, somebody had to help me, and if they could speak my language, why not?
In Haiti, Creole is both national and official. And I think that's a major point that could lead other Caribbean nations, including Dominica, Sainte-Lucie, Jamaica, other places where there is a local Creole being spoken, whether it's a Creole like Haiti with a vocabulary that's derived from French, or whether it's a Creole like in Jamaica, like Patois, where the vocabulary is derived from English. I think that in order to achieve universal human rights in the Caribbean, it's very important that we do give our nation languages, our local languages, the due in terms of the official status, but also in terms of the use in education, you see? And this is where I think that the Creole in Haiti, at least in the history of policies around Creole, could be used as a model. Of course, there is another question, which is the actual practice. Often the practice does not match the legal documents, doesn't match the scientific basis on which Creole was proclaimed as national, but also as a language of instruction. But that's another story.
That Creole is the most spoken language in CARICOM. So I say that and people say, yeah, how come? And I say, boy, in Haiti alone, you have 11 million people speaking Creole. 11 million in Haiti. Then you have in Martinique, because Martinique is part of the OECS right now, they've joined the OECS. You have Sainte-Lucie, you have qu'elle, you have Dominica, and so on. So in the region, we are looking at least 12 million speakers.
In terms of numbers of who speaks Creole in the Caribbean, it's really important that we give Creole its due as one of the most spoken languages of the Caribbean, and therefore should be used, for example, in CARICOM, should be used in communications throughout the Caribbean, and also in terms of education, it should be given an important place in the school system. And what's happening in Haiti in terms of the legal framework around the use of Creole in education, that should also inspire other Caribbean nations where there is also a Creole being spoken, be it a French-derived Creole, like in Dominica, Sainte-Lucie, Martinique, Guadeloupe, or English-based Creole, like in Jamaica or Barbados or Trinidad.
French Creole it has so much potential to be the most dynamic lingua franca. It's spoken in territories where English is spoken, where French is spoken, where Spanish is spoken, where Portuguese is spoken. I don't know about Suriname, but I'm sure there's some French Creole speakers in Suriname too, if you want to throw in Dutch. But we cannot resume and diminish the Caribbean to these so-called four linguistic blocks. The Caribbean is much more than the English block, the French block, the Spanish block, and the Dutch block. Those are just the official colonial titles and perspectives. The real truth of the Caribbean is that the majority of us are Creole speakers, and that the majority Creole language in this entire region is French Creole. And in terms of the Creoles of the Caribbean, there are more English Creoles, but French Creole is still the #1 Creole language of the Caribbean and the #2 language of the Caribbean. Extremely important in terms of the population of speakers, as well as its spread through different multilingual states. So it crosses every single language block, official language block in the area, wherever, as I say, the only one I'm not sure about is the Dutch, but I'm pretty sure you'll find some Haitians in Curacao and other places. So it's huge. It has the potential to, even cruise ships coming in here from Martinique and Guadeloupe, they actually, when they found out that we have French Creole here, they asked for French Creole interpreters, because of course they could deal with French if they want to, but they wanted to feel at home. And that the kinship that we share through language is amazing. And French Creole, I think, has been the most successful language in terms of breaking barriers, and it has the potential to really reunite the Caribbean, or I should say unite. The French Creole has the potential to unite the Caribbean because it's spoken in so many places by so many people. And Haiti, of course, is world famous for its art and its music and its literature and its culture. So, and the rest of us, we have plenty to offer too. We may not be as big as Haiti, but we certainly want to join forces.
Très bien, pour ces mamans-là, qu'à lever et puis comprendre, c'est nous aider l'avantage au pays, nous, c'est ici. Ils savent comprendre patois, ils savent comprendre l'anglais. N'importe côté où aller, Guadeloupe, ou aller à Martinique, ou qu'à un créole, et puis ils savent comprendre. Mais oui, je crois qu'il est important, puis ça, chaque monde qui vient dans le pays, nous, ils ont sorti Guadeloupe, ils ont sorti Martinique, et puis ils ont demandé pour un monde qui savent parler créole. Avec dès là, ils passent à comprendre rien en anglais, et c'est nous, moi, avec les autres là, qui nous pour translate en créole, pour qu'ils comprennent ça, nous, et ça nous fait.
I'm Jimo from Guadeloupe, represent Bikini Caribbean. Bikini Caribbean is a French Caribbean media for IC, the beautiful pays of Sainte-Lucie. Nous avons parlé créole, mais pas de problème. Ben nous là, nous avons montré qui Jean Caraïbe la belle, qui Jean ville la belle, avec qui Jean nous c'est un seul et même peuple. C'est ça, parce que c'est one Caribbean, c'est un seul peuple qui nous est.
C'est la première fois où vous venez à Sainte-Lucie pour Carnaval?
Non, c'est au moins 5e fois au moins.
Ah, wow, right, c'est bon, c'est bon.
Et à chaque fois qu'on vient, on revient encore, parce qu'elle est belle. Carnaval là, c'est belle, et nous avons invité tout le monde, que ce soit Guadeloupe, Martinique, Guyane, venir découvrir Caraïbe là, et venir pour bien.